Welcome to Mr. Nightmarish.
In 2002, in a small, sleepy town nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, the school day ended like any other. Teenagers rushed out of the old brick building, their backpacks slung over their shoulders, ready to go home. A group of about 10 students, all between the ages of 14 and 16, boarded their usual school bus, driven by Mr. Wilkins, a man known for his friendly, cheerful attitude. He was one of those drivers who knew every student by name, asked about their day, and always had a joke or a story to tell. But today something was different. As the students piled onto the bus, they noticed immediately that Mr. Wilkins was unusually quiet. No greeting, no smile, just silence. His eyes remained fixed ahead, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. At first, the kids didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just having a bad day. But as the bus began its route, a strange tension filled the air. The usual chatter and laughter among the students died down, replaced by an unsettling quiet. Even the youngest ones, who usually couldn't sit still, seemed to sense that something was off. The road wound through the familiar landscape of their town: small houses, local stores, fields. But about halfway through the route, just before reaching the first stop, the bus made an unexpected turn. Mr. Wilkins veered off the main road onto a narrow, overgrown path that none of the students had ever seen before. It was barely wide enough for the bus, with trees and thick bushes closing in on both sides. The students exchanged confused glances. Where are we going?" one of the older boys, Kyle, asked, but Mr. Wilkins didn't respond. He kept driving, his face expressionless, his eyes locked forward as if he were in a trance. The bus rattled and bumped along the rough path, deeper into the woods. The dense canopy overhead blocked out most of the daylight, casting everything in eerie, greenish shadows. The farther they went, the more uneasy the students became. Something about the trees and the thick air felt oppressive, almost like the woods themselves were alive, watching them. Suddenly, the bus slowed to a stop in front of a run-down, decrepit house, hidden deep within the forest. The house looked like it had been abandoned for decades, its wooden frame sagging, windows broken, and ivy crawling up the sides. The front door hung slightly open, creaking as it swayed in the breeze. The place radiated a sense of foreboding, like a forgotten relic of something dark. Without saying a word, Mr. Wilkins stood up, walked to the front of the bus, and opened the doors. Then, to the students' horror, he stepped off the bus and disappeared into the woods behind the house, without looking back. The students sat frozen in shock. What was happening? Where had their driver gone? Panic quickly set in. They shouted after him, but he was already gone, swallowed by the trees. Kyle stood up, trying to take control of the situation. "Okay, does anyone know how to drive a bus?" he asked, but no one did. A couple of the kids fumbled with their phones, trying to call their parents or the school, but there was no cell service this deep in the woods. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. The atmosphere inside the bus grew heavier, as if something unseen was closing in around them. Some of the younger students began to cry, while the older ones tried to comfort them, though they were just as scared. "Maybe we should try walking back," suggested Megan, a quiet girl who usually sat in the back. But the idea of leaving the bus and walking into the dark, unfamiliar woods seemed worse than staying put. Just as the tension reached its peak, the distant sound of an approaching engine broke the silence. Relief washed over the group. Another bus came into view, barreling down the path toward them. As it drew closer, the students recognized the driver. It was Mr. Wilkins, but this time he looked frantic, his face pale with fear. The bus screeched to a halt beside theirs, and Mr. Wilkins jumped out, shouting, "Get off that bus now!" The students hurried off the abandoned bus, some of them tripping over each other in their rush to escape. As they gathered near the new bus, they bombarded Mr. Wilkins with questions. "What happened? Where did you go? Why did you leave us?" Breathing heavily, Mr. Wilkins looked at them, his face etched with panic and confusion. "I don't know what that was," he said, pointing to the bus they had just left. "That bus hasn't been in service for over 10 years. It went missing along with its driver and passengers, and it was never found." The students fell silent, their eyes widening in disbelief. "What do you mean?" one of the younger boys, Josh, asked. Mr. Wilkins shook his head, clearly shaken. That bus, it vanished a decade ago, with a group of kids just like you. They were never seen again. I have no idea how you ended up on it, but when I lost sight of you on the route, I knew something was wrong. The students stared at the rusted, decrepit bus they had just been sitting on moments ago. The worn-out paint, the broken windows, the musty smell inside, all of it suddenly made sense. That wasn't their bus. It was a ghost bus, a relic from a tragedy long past, and somehow they had been lured onto it. Mr. Wilkins hurried them onto the new bus, and the group sat in stunned silence as he sped back to the main road. No one spoke a word until they were safely back in town, where parents and school staff awaited them, confused and worried. The mysterious bus that had taken them into the woods was never seen again. But the students who were there that day would never forget the chilling ride, the rundown house, or the fact that they had narrowly escaped becoming part of a decades-old mystery. In 2014, Claire, a 19-year-old college student, took up babysitting to make some extra money. That fateful night, she was watching over the Turner family's 2 children, Emma, age 6, and Noah, age 8, in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. The house was situated on the edge of a wooded area, which gave it a secluded feel. The parents had gone out for a rare date night, leaving Claire to handle the usual routine: playtime, dinner, and bedtime. The evening passed peacefully. After dinner, the kids played a board game before Claire tucked them into bed around 8:30 p.m. She read them a story, kissed their foreheads, and switched off the lights. As she settled into the living room to watch TV, the house grew quiet. It was just another ordinary night, until the phone rang. Claire looked at the clock, 9:30 p.m. It was odd for the phone to ring at that hour, but she assumed it was the Turners checking in. She picked it up, but instead of a familiar voice, a chilling whisper came through the receiver. "Check on the children." At first, she thought it was a prank. Maybe one of her friends had somehow learned where she was babysitting and decided to scare her. Laughing it off, she hung up and went back to watching her show. But about 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the whisper was more insistent. "Check on the children." The tone sent a shiver down her spine. Claire started to feel uneasy, but still, she reasoned that it was a joke. She looked down the hallway toward the kids' rooms. Nothing seemed out of place, so she brushed it off and continued watching TV. The third call came at 10 p.m., and this time the voice was louder, harsher. "Check on the children now." Something was wrong. Claire's heart raced as she stood up and headed upstairs to check on Emma and Noah. She opened the door to their room and froze. The windows, which she distinctly remembered closing, were now wide open. The night air blew the curtains, and outside it was pitch black. Panic surged through her. How had the windows opened on their own? Were the kids safe? She rushed to their beds and was relieved to find them both fast asleep, unaware of what had just happened. She quickly shut the windows, locked them, and pulled the curtains tight. With her heart still pounding, Claire decided to call the police. As she explained the situation to the dispatcher, her hands trembled. The police assured her they would send an officer to check on the house. In the meantime, Claire hurried back downstairs to make sure all the doors were locked. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. When the officers arrived, they searched the entire property. After about 30 minutes, one of them came back inside with a grave expression. "Ma'am, were you outside at all tonight?" "No, I stayed inside," Claire replied, her voice shaky. The officer nodded and motioned for her to follow him to the backyard. There, in the freshly damp soil near the children's windows, were muddy footprints. They led from the garden to the house, directly under the window that had been opened. The prints were large, far too large to belong to the children. Someone had been out there, watching the house, and more disturbingly, they had likely entered the house through the open window, only to flee when Claire came upstairs to check on the kids. The police searched the surrounding area, but found no other signs of forced entry or lingering intruders. Whoever had been there was long gone, and the source of the phone calls was never traced. The mystery caller vanished into the night, leaving Claire with a haunting memory of the night she narrowly avoided a potential tragedy. In 2017, Ron, a successful businessman, embarked on a business trip to Japan, a country he had always admired for its blend of modernity and tradition. After a long flight and a day full of meetings in Kyoto, Ron decided to book a room in a traditional Japanese inn, known as a ryokan, rather than a standard hotel. He was drawn to its old-world charm: tatami mats, sliding paper doors, and a view of the lush garden outside. The inn was nestled in a quiet, historical part of the city, far from the bustling tourist spots. As Ron stepped inside, he felt a strange heaviness in the air. The scent of damp earth hung around him, and the dim lighting made the hallways feel like they belonged to another era. The innkeeper, a small elderly man, greeted Ron warmly, but something about the man's reserved demeanor unsettled him. Still, Ron chalked it up to the unfamiliar environment and his exhaustion from the long day. When he entered his room, a slight shiver ran down his spine. The space was cozy, but something was off. The air inside felt dense, almost oppressive. The faint smell of dampness clung to the walls, but he told himself it was just the age of the building. As the evening wore on, Ron settled into the room, took a quick shower, and lay down on the thin futon to get some rest. By 2 a.m., jet lag had him tossing and turning. That's when he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. His eyes fluttered open, and his heart instantly raced as he realized he wasn't alone. In the dim light from the garden lantern outside, he saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but as his eyes adjusted, he could make out more detail. The figure appeared to be a woman, draped in an old-fashioned, tattered kimono. Her face was obscured by darkness, but her long, tangled hair hung down over her shoulders, swaying slightly, as if moved by an invisible breeze. Ron's throat tightened in fear. He tried to move, to call out, but his body was paralyzed, frozen in place. He could do nothing but watch as the figure slowly inched closer. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound echoing in his ears. The woman's outline remained indistinct, but there was something unmistakably malicious about her presence. It felt as though the temperature in the room dropped several degrees as she approached, a coldness seeping into his bones. Suddenly, the woman stopped just inches from his face. Her breath, cold and damp, brushed his skin. In that moment, Ron felt like time had stopped, and he was trapped in an eternal nightmare. The next thing he knew, he jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Sunlight was streaming through the paper-thin curtains, and the room was once again quiet and serene. It was morning. He sat up, his hands shaking, and tried to shake off the lingering terror. He told himself it had just been a nightmare, a side effect of jet lag and the unfamiliar surroundings. But the vividness of the experience stuck with him as he packed his things and prepared to check out. When he approached the front desk, the innkeeper greeted him with the same gentle smile as the night before. As Ron handed over his key, the innkeeper's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "Did you sleep well?" the man asked, his tone cautious. Ron hesitated before replying, "Well enough, but I had a strange dream." The innkeeper's eyes darkened, and he lowered his voice. "Did you see her?" A chill ran down Ron's spine. "What do you mean? Who?" The innkeeper sighed, his face weary. "Many guests have seen a woman in that room. They describe her as a shadow watching them in the night, but no one knows who she is or what she wants." Ron left the inn feeling a deep sense of unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that the shadowy woman had been more than just a figment of his imagination. As he walked away from the ryokan, the air seemed lighter, the smell of damp earth fading as quickly as the memory of his night in that room. But the question lingered in his mind. Who was she, and why did she come to him?